When a kind stranger gives up her seat on a crowded train, she has no idea that the man she's helping is a powerful CEO, and a father who desperately needs to believe in humanity again. Natalie James, 29 years old, with warm brown skin, curly chestnut hair tucked under a knitted burgundy beanie, and soft eyes reflecting quiet resilience, squeezed herself into the crowded morning train in Kingston, Vermont. Dressed in a faded navy coat and scuffed ankle boots, her expression was tired but kind. Across from her stood a tall man in his early 40s, Elijah Carter, a sharply dressed man in a slate-gray trench coat and black slacks. His dark skin was smooth but tight with tension. A luxury wristwatch peeked from beneath his sleeve, but his eyes, exhausted and full of love, were fixed on his fidgeting 6-year-old son. Little Micah Carter, wrapped in a red puffer jacket and clutching a ragged toy tiger, had cinnamon-colored skin like his father and wild curls flattened under a wool cap. His face was sleepy and irritated, lips turned in a pout as he clung to Elijah's hand, barely able to stay upright with the train's jerking motion. Noticing the boy's discomfort, Natalie stood and gently touched Elijah's arm. "He can have my seat," she offered with a warm smile, dimples forming on her cheeks. Elijah hesitated, unaccustomed to kindness without cost, but nodded. "Thank you, really." That simple gesture sparked something none of them could predict. Elijah Carter was not the kind of man who took trains. As the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm based in Kingston, Vermont, Elijah was used to black cars and private jets. But after a recent fallout with the board over corporate ethics, and an unsettling realization that his son barely understood how real people lived, he made a decision that raised eyebrows in his inner circle. He began commuting with Micah on the morning train. He wanted Micah, 6 years old, cinnamon-skinned and wide-eyed with innocence, to see the world not through tinted windows but through shared experiences. And for Elijah, who had been hardened by ambition, this was an attempt to soften, to reconnect not only with his son but with the world he had once known. That morning, Natalie's gesture struck him harder than expected. As he watched her grip a rail with one hand and type on her phone with the other, his mind couldn't shake the thought, why did her kindness feel so unfamiliar, and why did it matter so much? Micah, now seated and sleepy, peeked up at Natalie and gave a bashful smile. Elijah noticed and quietly smiled too. In that crowded space, something unseen had shifted. 2 stops later, the seat next to Natalie opened up. Elijah gestured and sat beside her, balancing Micah on his knee. "I'm Elijah," he said, offering his hand. "Natalie," she replied, shaking it. "And your son is—" "Micah, he's in 1st grade, and this," he laughed, "is his idea of an adventure." Natalie chuckled, her eyes softening. "It's a good way to see people, the real kind." Elijah tilted his head, intrigued. There was something quietly profound about her presence. Her clothes were modest, her bag worn, her eyes alert yet gentle. She looked like someone who had seen both struggle and grace. "You take this route every day?" he asked. "Yeah, to the hospital. My mom's there. I try to check in before work." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Is she?" Recovering slowly. They rode in silence for a moment, the train humming beneath them. Micah leaned his head on Elijah's chest and dozed off. Natalie stared at the boy, smiling wistfully. "It's good he has you," she whispered. Elijah felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know her, but her words stayed with him long after she left the train. Elijah couldn't shake the feeling all day. Between boardroom presentations and investor calls, his thoughts kept drifting to Natalie, the woman in the navy coat with the tired eyes and warm smile. That evening at home in his modern glass-walled apartment overlooking Kingston Harbor, Elijah sat with Micah and asked casually, "Did you like the lady on the train?" Micah nodded. "She had kind eyes, like Grammy." Elijah smiled. His mother had passed years ago, but Micah still remembered her kindness vividly. That memory made him pause. He thought about Natalie's job at the hospital, her mention of her mother, the weariness behind her warmth. It haunted him. He was used to solving problems, building empires. But when it came to people, he wasn't sure how to help without overstepping. That night he searched her name, Natalie James, and found a social media post buried deep in a fundraiser platform. It was for her mother. Heart surgery needed, insurance denied, anything helps. Elijah stared at the screen for a long time. Then, without telling anyone, not even his assistant, he made a quiet, anonymous donation, enough to cover everything. He turned off the light and stared into the city. For once, his wealth felt like it had a purpose beyond numbers. Natalie nearly dropped her coffee the next morning. The hospital's billing office had called her, and the woman on the phone sounded confused yet delighted. "Miss James, the balance has been paid in full entirely." "What? Are you sure?" she asked, clutching her coat tighter. "Yes, we verified it 3 times. Natalie stumbled out of the hospital lobby, heart pounding, Her hands trembled as she checked the fundraiser page. An anonymous donor. A massive contribution. She couldn't process it. Her mother had been on the waiting list for months. Now the surgery could be scheduled. The worry that had eaten her sleep, strained her smile, and dimmed her spirit, gone in a single moment. But who? She stepped onto the same train as before, scanning the car instinctively. Elijah and Micah were already seated. Elijah, ever composed, gave her a polite nod. Micah beamed. Natalie sat across from them, trying not to cry. "Good morning," Elijah said casually. "Morning," she replied, voice shaky. "Something amazing happened today." "Oh, I don't know who did it, but someone saved my mom's life." Elijah met her eyes, calm, unreadable. "That's wonderful," he said, and meant it. Natalie nodded, still stunned. "Some people, they're just angels in disguise." Elijah looked away, humbled by her words. He hadn't expected gratitude, but hearing it now, it reached a part of him that had been numb for years. Over the following days, Natalie and Elijah found themselves catching the same train more often than not. What had begun as a momentary connection was now developing into a pattern, a comfortable rhythm. Each morning Elijah wore a crisp, tailored coat, his dark skin always smooth and his movements calculated. But Natalie could see his guard lowering, especially when Micah was in his arms. Micah, still wrapped in his favorite red jacket and still holding his ragged tiger toy, had become the glue in this evolving trio. Natalie, always in the same navy coat, her brown skin glowing softly in the morning light, began bringing small items for Micah. Stickers, a comic book, a tiny pack of chocolate chip cookies. Micah responded with giddy enthusiasm, hugging her knees every time he saw her. "You don't have to do that," Elijah told her gently one morning. "I know," she said with a shrug and a smile, "but I like to." He studied her, trying to understand what made her so open-hearted. There was no hidden agenda, no ambition, just sincerity. That morning Elijah didn't use his phone during the ride. He just watched her talk to Micah, listening, laughing, making silly faces, and he felt something rare, peace. But peace wasn't something Natalie had in abundance. Despite her warmth and her patience, she was exhausted. Her mother's condition had stabilized after the hospital received payment, but Natalie still carried years of financial strain and emotional fatigue. Her job as a junior assistant at a healthcare logistics company was unstable. Layoffs were looming. She was doing her best to hold everything together. Each night she'd return home to a tiny apartment in a crumbling building. She'd heat up soup, check on her mother's charts, and fall asleep on the couch with a laptop on her stomach. But in the mornings she chose to smile. She chose kindness, and somehow that kindness had found its way to the right people. She didn't know that Elijah had followed up with the hospital anonymously, ensuring her mother received ongoing care, or that he'd called a friend on the hospital board to make sure no billing errors would occur again. All she knew was that Micah smiled when he saw her, that Elijah had started saving a seat beside him, and that, for 30 minutes each morning, she didn't feel so alone. What she didn't realize yet was that she was being seen in ways she never had before. Elijah had built his empire from the ground up. Raised in South Boston by a single mother who worked 2 jobs, he had fought tooth and nail for everything. Scholarships, internships, funding rounds. Somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with the ground beneath him. But now, riding this train every morning with Micah and Natalie, his perspective was shifting. One day, he watched Natalie defend a young intern at her company who was being dismissed unfairly by a rude manager. She didn't know Elijah had arrived early and was visiting a friend in the same building. From the hallway, he heard Natalie calmly but firmly stand up for the intern, citing policies and calling for fairness. Later, when he ran into her outside the building, she looked surprised. "You saw that?" "I did," he said. "You were impressive." She blushed, brushing her curls away from her face. "Just trying to do what's right." It was the first time Elijah realized she wasn't just kind, she was principled, strong, and willing to speak truth to power even when no one was watching. That moment stuck with him. She reminded him of his mother, of values he feared he had buried beneath success. A few weeks later, Elijah invited Natalie for coffee after the morning train ride. Micah was dropped off at school, and the two of them sat at a small cafe near downtown Kingston. Natalie wore a soft cream sweater, her curls tied back, her brown skin radiant despite her visible fatigue. Elijah leaned forward. "Natalie, I've been thinking. There's an opening on my foundation's board. We're restructuring. I'd like you to apply." Natalie's eyes widened. "Me, you've got the heart, the vision, and I've seen how you lead. You're not afraid to speak up for others." She hesitated. "Elijah, I don't have the experience. You have everything that matters." She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of patronizing pity, but all she found was sincerity. Still, the offer scared her. It was too big, too fast, but deep down it also sparked something she hadn't felt in years: hope. "Let me think about it," she finally said. "Of course," he replied. No pressure. They finished their coffee in companionable silence. The city moved around them, but for once neither of them felt rushed. Natalie had always been the one offering a seat. Now someone was finally making space for her. One morning, as they waited for the train, a cold wind blew through the station. Natalie shivered slightly, her navy coat not quite enough against the sharp air. Elijah, standing beside her, removed his scarf, a sleek black cashmere one, and gently wrapped it around her shoulders. She froze for a second, then looked up at him. "Thank you," she whispered. His dark brown eyes met hers. "You're always looking out for others. Let someone look after you for a change." Micah ran ahead on the platform, chasing a pigeon, giggling wildly. Natalie laughed, watching him. Elijah smiled at her laugh. It was rare, but it lit up her whole face. In that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them. Not a declaration, not a romantic confession, but something gentler, deeper, an acknowledgement that their connection had grown roots. As the train approached, Natalie touched the scarf around her neck. Still warm from Elijah's gesture, she hadn't expected kindness from someone like him. But now she realized kindness didn't wear just one face, and maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of a train ride but the beginning of a new journey. It was a Thursday when Natalie's world began to shift again. Her supervisor, pressed by company cutbacks, called her in for a quiet conversation. "You've been doing excellent work," he said, avoiding eye contact. "But they're asking departments to trim costs. We're letting go of junior assistants." Natalie sat motionless, her brown skin paling slightly, her chestnut curls still damp from the morning drizzle. She had just gotten her mother's next treatment scheduled. This job, though modest, was her lifeline. She walked out in a daze, coat clutched tight, trying not to cry in the crowded hallway. On the train that evening, Elijah noticed something immediately. Her face, usually warm, kind, steady, was blank, distant. "Natalie," he asked gently, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "What happened?" She shook her head, blinking back tears. "It's nothing, just a rough day." Elijah didn't press. Instead, he held her gaze and said, "You don't have to carry it alone." That night he sent a message to his board. The position at the foundation, he wanted it filled, immediately, and he wanted Natalie. He didn't just admire her, he respected her, and he wasn't about to let life grind her down when he could offer something real. The next morning, Natalie opened her inbox to find a formal letter from the Carter Foundation. It was an offer. Generous salary, flexible hours, meaningful work. Elijah had signed it personally. She stared at it for a long time, hands trembling. It was too perfect, too well-timed. Part of her wanted to accept immediately. The other part, the scarred part, feared strings attached. That day on the train she turned to him and said softly, "Why are you doing this, Elijah?" He didn't flinch. "Because I believe in you, and because people like you deserve more than just survival." Natalie blinked, overwhelmed. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," he said, voice steady. "That's why it matters." Later that evening, after putting her mother to bed, Natalie signed the letter. It wasn't just a new job, it was a turning point. And as she sat there, scarf still around her neck, she smiled for the first time that day, not out of relief, but out of hope. Natalie's first day at the Carter Foundation felt surreal. The office overlooked Kingston Harbor, glass windows flooding the space with morning light. She wore a pale blue blouse and gray slacks, simple but neat, and pulled her curls into a bun. Her brown skin glowed, her expression a careful balance of nervousness and gratitude. She was greeted warmly by the staff, many of whom had heard of her arrival and were eager to meet the new director of community outreach. During the afternoon briefing, Natalie spoke passionately about local health initiatives and underserved families, her voice steady, her conviction palpable. Elijah watched from across the table, impressed. It wasn't just that she spoke well. It was that she knew what it was like to struggle, and more importantly, to rise. At the end of the day, she found a small handwritten note on her desk. "You were incredible today. Welcome to the place where you can finally build something of your own." Elijah, Natalie held the note to her chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere, not because she fought to be seen, but because someone saw her from the very start. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Natalie, now working at the Carter Foundation, balanced her days between strategic meetings and grassroots outreach. Her evenings were spent at the hospital or at home, planning wellness drives and mentoring young interns, something she was deeply passionate about. Elijah and Micah became fixtures in her routine. Most mornings they still shared the same train ride. Micah clinging to her hand, Elijah listening quietly to their conversations. Micah had grown attached, in the way only a child can. He now asked Natalie to read his favorite stories, drew her pictures at school, and declared she made the best train jokes. Elijah, too, found himself opening up in unexpected ways. He began asking Natalie for input on family policies at the foundation. He shared stories about his mother. And occasionally, when Micah had gone to bed, he'd call her just to talk about life. Their friendship had become a steady flame, warm and undeniable. One evening, after dinner at Natalie's apartment, as she cleaned up and Elijah helped dry the dishes, their hands brushed. They paused, looked at each other, said nothing, but something had changed. The distance between them was no longer so wide. One stormy evening, Natalie received a call from Elijah, his voice strained and low. "Can you come over?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. When she arrived, Elijah opened the door dressed in a navy sweater and worn jeans, his usual composure gone. His eyes, always sharp and composed, were red-rimmed. On the coffee table lay a framed photo of his late mother. Micah was asleep in the next room. "I forgot it was her birthday today," he said, sitting heavily on the couch. "I remembered late. I didn't even tell Micah about her. I'm failing." Natalie sat beside him, her presence soft and steady. "You're not failing," she said. "You're healing." Elijah dropped his head into his hands. "She was the strongest person I knew. I used to think I had to be just like her. But lately, I think I just want to be better for Micah. And maybe, for you too." Natalie's breath caught. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Neither spoke for a while. Sometimes, closeness wasn't built through grand gestures, but through the quiet courage of letting someone see you when you're not okay. That night, they didn't define what they were, but they both knew. This was no longer just friendship. As autumn deepened over Kingston, so did the bond between Natalie and Elijah. Their connection wasn't rushed. It grew slowly, like ivy wrapping around a sturdy post, strong, rooted, and deeply intertwined with shared experiences. Their morning train rides became less about routine and more about presence. Micah would curl up beside Natalie, now a comforting part of his world, while Elijah simply watched them with something close to awe. At work, Natalie thrived. She implemented a new outreach program for single parents and launched a mobile clinic project in memory of Elijah's mother. Her confidence blossomed, and so did the respect others showed her. But despite everything, neither she nor Elijah had spoken aloud the shift happening between them. Until one crisp Saturday afternoon during a foundation-sponsored park event, Micah tugged at Elijah's sleeve and asked, "Is Natalie going to be my mommy someday?" Elijah froze. Natalie, standing just feet away handing out flyers, didn't hear. "I don't know yet," Elijah whispered, "but I hope so." Later that night he walked Natalie home. Outside her apartment he finally said it. "I don't know where this leads, Natalie, but I want to try, with you." She smiled, a soft and trembling smile. "So do I." As winter approached, their lives continued to merge, quietly, steadily, beautifully. Natalie started spending evenings at Elijah's penthouse, where Micah would race to show her his drawings, or fall asleep snuggled up against her side. She cooked meals with Elijah, teaching him how to make stew without burning it. He surprised her by remembering her favorite tea. They took turns telling bedtime stories. These weren't extravagant moments, but they were everything. Natalie still cared for her mother, whose health had stabilized thanks to quality care. And now she had help, emotional support, shared laughter. She once told Elijah over a quiet dinner, "I used to think happiness came in big, loud packages, but it's actually the little soft ones, like someone remembering how you take your coffee, or reading stories to a sleepy 6-year-old. Elijah, whose world had once been skyscrapers and strategy decks, nodded with quiet gratitude. In Natalie, he had found the rarest kind of wealth, someone who knew how to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. And every day he grew more certain that she wasn't just what he wanted, she was what he'd been missing all along. Elijah wasn't the kind of man who second-guessed himself. But when he bought the ring, he kept it in his coat pocket for 2 weeks. Not because he doubted his feelings, but because this wasn't just about love. It was about creating a safe, real, enduring home for both Natalie and Micah. One snowy morning, while Natalie helped Micah build a lopsided snowman in the park, Elijah watched from a bench, heart full. She was bundled in her navy coat and gray gloves, her curls hidden under a wool hat, her smile wide and unfiltered. He stood, walked toward her slowly, and took her hand. Micah grinned, sensing something exciting. Elijah knelt, not because it was expected, but because it felt right. "Natalie James," he said, eyes glistening, "you gave up a seat for me and my son on a crowded train. But what you really gave us was a future. Will you marry me?" Natalie gasped, tears brimming. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes." Micah threw his mittens in the air and yelled, "We're going to be a family." And just like that, the snow around them wasn't cold anymore. It was warm with love. The wedding wasn't lavish. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Held in the same city park where Elijah proposed, surrounded by golden leaves and the people they loved, it was an intimate celebration of resilience, second chances, and found family. Natalie wore a soft ivory gown, her curls cascading down her shoulders. Her brown skin glowed against the soft afternoon light. She held Micah's hand as she walked down the aisle. He wore a tiny suit and beamed like the sun. Elijah, in a classic Navy suit, waited at the altar, heart pounding. He wasn't the same man who once lived behind walls of wealth and isolation. He was now a man rebuilt by love, by purpose, and by a woman who reminded him how to be grounded again. Their vows were personal. Natalie spoke of choice, courage, and kindness. Elijah spoke of gratitude, growth, and home. When they kissed, Micah yelled, "Finally," and the guests laughed through tears. Later that night they danced slowly beneath fairy lights. No big speeches, no grandeur. Just the quiet joy of knowing they had found what most people spend their lives chasing, love in its purest form. They still take the train sometimes, not because they have to, but because it reminds them where everything began. Micah, now 7, always grabs the same seat by the window. Natalie sits beside him, still carrying her old navy coat, though it's been patched and warmed with memories. Elijah holds her hand, wearing that same scarf he once gave her during a cold morning in the past. Their story is not about perfection. It's about showing up for one another every single day, through quiet moments, through hardship, through laughter, through love. Natalie never forgot how it all started, with a single act of kindness on a crowded train. And Elijah, he never stopped believing that sometimes the best things in life don't come from planning or power, but from people who offer a seat, who see you, and who stay. Together, they built something stronger than a home. They built a family, a bond unbreakable, a journey unfinished. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe for more emotional and inspiring tales of love, kindness, and second chances. There's always another journey waiting to begin.